everyone, welcome back. My name's Jessica Rubin, and today, I don't know how to start this video. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thanks again for clicking on this video. I so appreciate the amount of support that I received on my first video. So today I'm going to be talking about why I was sent to a residential treatment center. In my first video I mentioned that I was, and that was all the information I gave. So today I'm going to be talking you through the events that kind of led up to me being sent away. Now, since this is the beginning of my channel, I want to keep names private, but for the time being, I don't want to mention the names of any programs that I went to because I did go to multiple programs, not just the one residential treatment center. It is in Utah. So yeah, for the time being on my channel, I'm going to be keeping these places anonymous. So I'm going to walk you through from fall of 2012, which is when I started my senior year of high school, until mid-January 2014, which is the day that I arrived at my treatment center. I won't be talking about any of my time at the residential treatment center in this video. I'm just going to be talking about the events leading up to me being sent there. In fall 2012, I started my senior year of high school in the suburbs of Chicago, and life was going great at that time. I was in show choir, I was in theater, I was in an a cappella group in my high school, which was a really big deal for me to be in because I'd always wanted to be in it. The first few weeks of my senior year were going really great. And I got into my first long-term relationship with a guy who we will keep anonymous, and I ended up dating him for about a year. We didn't go to the same high school. He actually lived in downtown Chicago. And so we had a semi-long-distance relationship for my entire senior year of high school. Near the beginning of my senior year, probably like September or October, I started having panic attacks. Horrible, debilitating, scary, really scary panic attacks, and they seemed to come out of nowhere. And then they started like clockwork. Every single night at like maybe 5 or 6 p.m., boom, I would get a panic attack. And they would last for hours, and they were horrible, and there was nothing that triggered them, and yet they came every single night, and I was expecting them, and they still happened, and they would last for hours, and they were horrible, and I would just scream and cry and just beg for it to end. That's kind of when my suicidal thoughts started, was because of these panic attacks. I just wanted them to end, and it wasn't so much suicidal as like I really wanted to die. It was more like, if dying is the only option to not have to suffer through these panic attacks, then I'll take it. Looking back, I'm glad that I didn't go through with that, because the panic attacks did eventually end. But it really seemed like they were never going to end because nothing triggered them. They just came on. The fan just came on. I really hope that doesn't distract the sound. I don't think it will. So we didn't really know why I was having these panic attacks. We thought maybe it was related to stress because I was in this new relationship and it was my senior year of high school. I was gonna go off to college, and I do not like change. I don't like change. Maybe subconsciously I was so stressed about all these changes that would potentially be coming. A little bit into having these panic attacks, I asked my mom if she could set me up to go see a therapist. I had seen therapists before, on and off, since like 2nd or 3rd grade almost. I remember going to therapists when I was really young, but I hadn't been seeing one at this point, so my mom set me up with the therapist, and I saw her and I told her about these panic attacks, and she was like, these are way more severe than anyone should be going through, especially daily. So she recommended that I go see a psychiatrist for an official diagnosis and medication, and I did just that, and he diagnosed me with panic disorder, and I went on medications. Now the thing about psych medications is they take a long time to kick in. They can take days or weeks to even see the effects. Having to wait to see if it was working, if you were getting adverse side effects, it was taking months. Eventually it would take me a little over a year until I got on the right medication and the right dosages. So that's a really, really hard time to go through, and it's horrible for anyone who has to go through that process. So eventually the panic attacks did stop, and I was able to come up with some coping mechanisms and fortunately get on the right medication to stop them. Then came spring semester of my senior year. I was still in this relationship, and I was just thriving. I was in, or what did I do? I was student director of the school play. I was still in show choir. I was in the variety show at school. I was getting ready to go off to college, and I graduated high school. And the summer between high school and college, I worked at a thrift store. And then September came, and I went to college. Now, I went to a college in downtown Chicago, so I would still be able to see my family, pretty often and go home for holidays, but I would be living in the city. And the thing is, going back to that relationship that I was in, he lived in the city as well. He lived only like 5 blocks away from the college that I was going to be going. Oh, the fan just turned on. He lived only about 5 blocks away from the college, and he was about 4 months younger than me, but he was in a different grade. So he was still in his senior year of high school while I was in my freshman year of college. I had this beautiful dream that we'd stay together. So, as you can probably guess, that didn't turn out the way that I had planned. Within 6 weeks of starting college, I was dropped out and I was back at living at home with my parents. It was a really unfortunate situation. The school was a very stressful environment. Because of my just anxiety and very occasional panic attacks, I did have a medical request to put in to get a private room in my dorm instead of sharing a room, just so I could have my personal space if I needed it. And I ended up being roomed with 3 seniors. It wasn't a good fit. I was very, very lonely. The classes were stressful. The guy that I was dating at that time, we went through a horrible, horrible, horrible weeks-long breakup, and I ended up dropping out. After that, my grandpa, he owned a company at the time, and he offered me a job being a kind of administrative assistant. And I did that for a little bit, but I was making some really poor choices. I don't know how in detail I want to get at this moment. And although I was staying busy from 9 to 5 at the job, after 5 p.m., there was no one could have any control over me. I was just going to do what I wanted to do. And I got back into self-harming and just horrible depressive episodes and making other bad decisions. So I was enrolled into a day program. I believe it's called a partial hospitalization program, which is basically you go and you have just group therapy and individual therapy, and then that goes until 3 p.m. and then the rest of the day you're free to make bad decisions, unfortunately. So that didn't work out so well. Then in November, I want to say mid to late November, I ended up in the ER for a severely bad mental breakdown, and they decided to admit me to the psych ward. However, the psych ward at that hospital was full, so they transferred me to another hospital. That other psych ward was for ages 18 and up, and it was not a very good situation. There was no really group therapy or safe space. It was mostly just sit in the day room all day, and they'll feed you 3 meals a day. And not much was provided in the ways of treatment. It was just kind of a lockdown facility. And I was the youngest by far. I was 18. The next youngest person was probably 25. There were a lot of inappropriate comments being made towards me, so they discharged me after 3 days there. And that, I believe, was the week before Thanksgiving of 2013. So I went back to work for my grandpa for a couple of more weeks. And I was hospitalized again at the end of December 2013. I went to the same ER as the first time, and that time they did have a bed open in that psych ward, in that behavioral health unit. So I went up there. That behavioral health unit was ages, I believe, 12 to 21. And I was 18 at that time, and it was a much better fit. It was a lot more, it was people my age, but it was also a lot more day therapy and coping mechanisms and group therapies and different activities instead of just sitting around and wallowing in your sadness. So during my time there, my parents reached out to an educational consultant. And an educational consultant, one of the things they do is they help parents find programs to send their children who are suffering with different issues, different treatment centers, and tell them different options. And so the educational consultant that my parents met up with recommended that I go to a wilderness therapy before a residential treatment center, which is something that's very common. And a lot of wilderness therapies are, they're very outdoorsy. They're wilderness. They're hiking all day long and living in tents and sleeping outside. And my parents, I think they knew that I would never speak to them again if they sent me there. I just, not an outdoorsy girl. So the ed consultant recommended this horticultural therapy program in Hawaii. So it was, we still stayed in cabins, we had indoor plumbing, but it was still a lot of meditative, relaxing, reflective time outdoors. At the hospital, I went into a meeting room with the ed consultant and my parents, and they explained this to me. And they made it sound like I was just going to go to the wilderness therapy and then I'd be done. In hindsight, they did know that that would not be my last stop, but they didn't tell me that. And I was all for it. I was like, great, I'll go to Hawaii and get cured and be back in 2 months. I didn't really want to go home because I knew I'd just end up back in the hospital. I didn't feel safe anywhere. I did feel safe in the hospital. When I was hospitalized, I was actually really glad because I knew I'd be safe there. I'd be watched. No one would let me make stupid decisions because I'd be on lockdown. So I was discharged from the hospital and I was supposed to leave the next day to go to Hawaii. And since I was going willingly, they didn't hire anyone to go with me. And I went to the airport and I was supposed to fly from Chicago to LA and then LA to Hawaii. And my flight to LA ended up getting canceled. So I went back home. And the next flight wasn't for 3 days. And those 3 days, they were really difficult. It wasn't really feasible to put me back in the hospital, so I was home, but I was having a lot more breakdowns and panic attacks and making really, really bad decisions, more self-harm. The day of my next plane ride came, and I went to LA, and I went to Hawaii, and a couple of staff members from the program in Hawaii came to the airport and picked me up and drove me to the program. And I got to that program on December 31st, 2013. The average stay for that program was about 6 to 8 weeks, I believe. After only 8 days at that wilderness therapy program, I was kicked out for being physically aggressive with another camper and other staff members. I couldn't be sent home to Chicago, so I was put on isolation until my parents could find somewhere else to send me. So during this time, I couldn't talk to my parents. There was always a staff as a middle person. I didn't really know what was going on. But it turns out my parents were working very, very hard trying to find somewhere else to send me. And their plan originally was for me to graduate the wilderness therapy and then most likely send me off to a residential treatment center. And when I got kicked out of this wilderness therapy, I think they really didn't have any other choice than to just send me to the residential treatment center. And they called around to a lot, and they finally found one that would accept a student who had a history of physical aggression, because understandably a lot don't. So they found this program, and one of the staff members at the wilderness therapy came up to me and said, okay, you're going to Utah, a transporter will be here, and your flight is in a few hours. And I said, okay. At that point, people could just kind of send me wherever. I didn't even care. I didn't want to go home to Chicago because I didn't feel safe there. I didn't feel safe in my own mind. So I was sent to Utah, and that was so uncommon for me because when I was younger, I hated traveling. I still hate traveling because I don't like being in places that are uncomfortable to me. So the fact that I was so willingly going to all these places, it was very odd and kind of shows how out of my normal head I was and how safe I felt being somewhere where I was being monitored. So the transporter met me at the airport in Hawaii, and she flew me to Utah, and she drove me from the Salt Lake City airport to my residential treatment center in Utah, and I arrived there on January 12th, 2014, and that is where my story begins, at my residential treatment center. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I have a whole list of more topics to make videos on, and so I hope this helped you get a little bit of a glimpse into my journey leading up to being sent to the residential treatment center, why my parents decided to send me there. Side note, I will forever be thankful to my parents for sending me there. I am in no way angry at them. I do not resent them. It was the best thing that could ever happen to me. It has changed my life for the better, and I am so thankful that I was sent to a residential treatment center. So please like this video, subscribe to my channel, leave your comments down below on your thoughts or any questions you have, or if there's any other content you'd like to see me make, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!